Hi, boys and girls. We're here with, now you're spelling your name Fuzz. It used to be Faz.
Yeah, well, Faz. I go by both.
I call you Faz. I call you Fazale Rana. I think it's pretty cool. So,
yep,
anyway.
You're welcome to do that.
Yep. I don't know if you know who V.S. Ramachandran is, but I call him the Rama, because he's my hero. So anyway, he's a neuroscientist. But anyway, so I guess I'll call you Fazale Rana. Brings back childhood memories. Anyway, we're here to have just a conversation, get to know each other, and try to figure out where we're at. And name my channel as Answers in Atheism. So if you have questions for atheists, this would probably be the place to ask. Maybe. Anyway. So what can you want to introduce yourself and talk about your books?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a biochemist by training, and after getting my PhD and doing a couple of postdocs, I went into industry and worked in research and development for not quite a decade before I joined about 22 years ago the organization that I'm now part of called Reasons to Believe, which is an organization that looks to explore the interface between science and the Christian faith with an eye towards showing how discoveries in science are in harmony with the Christian worldview. So that's, in a nutshell, the organization. And I'm particularly interested as a biochemist in questions dealing with the design of biochemical systems and questions dealing with the origin of life and now synthetic biology, particularly areas where people are looking to create protocells. And so I've written a number of books along those lines, Origins of Life, The Cell's Design, Creating Life in the Lab. I've got another book coming out. It technically should have been on the shelves October 1, but because of the pandemic, we're having a problem getting the book printed. The printer is just not able to maintain a timetable that works. But hopefully within the next few weeks, that book will be available. It's called Fit for a Purpose. And then I also have interest in the question of the origin of humanity, kind of the other end of the spectrum in the life sciences. And so written a book called Who Was Adam, and another book called Humans 2.0, which is a book about transhumanism, looking to modify human beings and drive our evolution towards post-human species. So those are essentially the areas of interest that I have, increasingly getting interested in questions about bioethics on how, the Christian worldview relates to advances in biotechnology, and does Christianity have anything meaningful to say about how these advances should be used? So that's, in a nutshell, kind of the things I've done, the things I've been interested in.
Okay. This Humans 2.0, I'm wondering what you think of all that. This transhumanism and modifying our biology.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a very complex area, I think, for anybody, regardless of their worldview. But by and large, I'm in favor of the technologies that are really legitimizing the transhumanist vision, like gene editing, brain-computer interfaces, anti-aging technology. Those tend to be the three big areas of advances that really give credibility to the idea of transhumanism. And so I'm very much in favor of pursuing those technologies. They're going to be revolutionary in terms of biomedicine. And
Yeah.
I don't fundamentally have an issue with human enhancements as such. To me, I think there's some obvious ethical issues that arise, again, regardless of one's world's view, about again, enhancing human beings.
Right.
But to me, I think where I would have a departure from the transhumanist vision would be the idea that ultimately technology is going to be the mode for our salvation. I think uh, our relationship with technology as human beings is very complex, and it's quite clear that technology oftentimes doesn't truly deliver on its promises of a utopia. It usually displaces uh, inefficiencies and pain and suffering into other locations as opposed to really truly solving them. But that would be the point of departure that I would have. And as a Christian, I would say that if we really are looking for hope, purpose, and destiny, it's found in the gospel, not in technology. Though technology is a wonderful, wonderful thing in many respects that we should take advantage of, but use in a thoughtful, intelligent way.
Yeah. Yeah. As a Buddhist, I would agree with you that technology is it's going to present so many opportunities for really messing things up that we have to tread very carefully on all
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah. Well, and the more powerful the technology, the more concern I think we rightly should have about uh, when there's unintended consequences. I think there's always going to be people that will, be malevolent in terms of their use of technology. But to me, the frightening thing would be the unintended consequences, where there's good meaning, good intention, but bad things happen because we don't fully understand the technology. But
Yeah, science fiction writers for the last 50 years have given us a pretty good idea what could go wrong.
they sure have.
They've
They sure
done
have.
really well at it. So anyway, so I'm going to try to figure out intelligent design. Okay, you're not a young Earth creationist, right?
No,
Okay,
no.
okay. So I'm trying to figure out at what point you think, like, I always do this, and I feel that nobody understands me, but we were all zygotes, right? And when we went from zygote to human being, that was an entirely natural process. Everybody agrees, I think, with that, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
So that's one starting point is, at the point we were born. But then going backwards, at what point do you think intelligent design was necessarily interjected into the story of life?
Yeah. Well, and hopefully I'm addressing your question, and it doesn't come across as if I'm evading it, but I think you see intelligent design manifest in a number of different ways. And when you think about questions of origins, I would argue that there are, at minimum, key transitions in life's history where life goes from one regime of complexity to another, where
Right.
a creator's intervention is required. I think would be at the origin of life, probably at the origin of eukaryotic cells, the origin of, I think, body plans, when it comes to multicellularity, and then probably the origin of consciousness. And I think human beings are exceptional in that we have a symbolic capability. So I think that would be another place. So I would say that there's key places in life's history where it looks to me like in divine intervention or intelligent agency is an integral part of that transition. Uh, I also think that there are many processes in nature, including biological processes, that were essentially instituted by a creator or an intelligent agent, if you will, that reflect in the process itself, again, agency. So when you look at, for some example, something like embryonic development, that would be something where I would say that process to me really seems as if it was, divinely orchestrated, divinely designed, and not to become too theological here, but when you look at the Genesis 1 creation account, it's interesting that in the original Hebrew, there's a variety of different words that are used to describe God's creative activity. Some, like bara, mean that God is originating something new that's never existed before. Others are describing God as fabricating something new from existing material. And then other places, God is essentially instituting process and is creating through process. And so that, and then of course, from a theological perspective, God is also considered to have providentially put in place processes that sustain the creation. And so, in other words, I think you can detect intelligent agency, and then the question becomes, how is God affecting that intervention? Is it through, in a direct personal way, or is it through process? So that question of divine action, I think is a very complex question that I'm still sorting through.
Yeah. So I guess what I've always wondered is why deny any of the story at all? Why not consider that God created the cosmos, okay, at some point, and sort of set it into motion, and that motion becomes a process that creates all of this? I mean, can you see a way for that to happen?
Oh, I think that that would be an incredibly elegant way for God to create. I don't have a fundamental objection to somebody positing that particular view. But when I look at, for example, let's say something like the origin of life, like abiogenesis, and I go there because that's the area that I've spent the most time, and over the last 30 some years thinking about. There, when I look at the process of abiogenesis, I would agree with people that work in the origin of life that, in principle, we have identified a number of viable chemical or physical processes that could contribute to, chemical evolution.
Right.
And we've, the scientists working in these areas have done a masterful job of really mechanistically understanding these processes. But to me, the place where I see limited success is translating what we've understood in the laboratory to the conditions of the early Earth. So just because you can have, for example, processes in the lab where RNA building blocks can assemble into RNA polymers on clay surfaces doesn't mean that process would actually be viable or productive under the conditions of the early Earth. And what makes that process successful in the laboratory is, in a sense, the fact that the researchers have involved themselves into the experimental design in such a way that they're actually contributing to the success of the experiment. And so to me, this is a place where I would say it looks like you've got to have some injection of intelligent agency. Now, precisely how that looks, I again am open to discussing that. But that's a place where, to me, it looks like there's divine intervention taking place. So that's why I would say that it looks like it's more than just a creator initiating things from the beginning and then being hands off, but it's a combination of both initiating things from the beginning, but then also intervening in some particular way.
Okay, because the natural process could never get there. Basically, you believe that it's impossible for it to ever get there. So it would require intervention.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the short answer to that would be yes, but it's a little bit more subtle than that. Because again, I would say that, we have identified in principle chemical and physical processes that could contribute to the origin of life. The question is, are those processes, would they be productive in such a way that would contribute to abiogenesis under the conditions of the early Earth? So so it's a little bit more nuanced than just simply no, but that's in a sense the bottom line.
Yeah. So my vision of abiogenesis is that there were not just these 4 nucleotides, 20 amino acids, these, that it was basically a mixture, that there was no homochirality, that it was a massive mixture of many times more compounds than we see in life today. And that out of that process, basically there was a statistical pathway that settled it down and narrowed it until we ended up with a prokaryotic universe, Earth, that sort of thing. And that, and even with the prokaryotes, that there was, we wouldn't recognize all of the different kinds of prokaryotes there were, and that those too went through this funnel and settled down, and that the complexity is born out of the multitudes of differences, and that it was very unlab-like. And this argument that we use pure conditions and pure reagents, and we control the reaction in the laboratory. Of course, you probably understand that we have to do that in order to figure out how one step worked, right?
Right.
But there are for every step, every 10 steps we figure out, I think there are about 1 million steps out there that we're not seeing, that we're probably never going to figure out. And I think it was who was that mathematician? God, I can't think of his name now. It's not Kuhn. No, I can't remember. But he basically proved that we could never figure it out. It's too complex to ever figure out. There are too many variables, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering what, I've noticed that biochemists are more likely than molecular biologists to not believe in these stochastic, mixing everything together and it happening. And I'm wondering, to some degree, we have all these diagrams, right, that we do, biochemical diagrams. I got one on my wall back here. I don't think you can probably see it over my right shoulder. No, I guess you can't see it. But anyway, it's all from Roche. It's all the biochemical pathways. And we draw out those pathways, and they look pretty clean and they look pretty cool. But then when you go and look at the molecular biology behind them, they're not. Yeah. They're not clean at all. They're. I've been looking into cell membranes, and there's this mass of protein families that are all interrelated. And then you look at one protein family and it's got a domain from another protein family, and it just looks like a whole bunch of Legos slammed together and they found their own way. And I guess that's my view of it. Of course, not believing in a deity, I don't have much choice but to find out how that works, right?
Right.
But,
let me just clarify a point that you made early on. I agree with you that when you're trying to understand what chemistry is even possible in abiogenesis, it's perfectly acceptable for researchers to be intimately and actively involved in the design and the execution of the experiment. In fact, you might even argue it's preferred. But when you're now asking the question, how does this translate to the conditions of the early Earth? This is where the involvement of the researcher can cross the line from a passive observer to an active participant.
Right.
And in fact, there's a number of origin of life researchers that are recognizing this as a problem. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with the can't think of the research team that did this work now, and I apologize for that. But they developed this computer algorithm called Alchemy, where they essentially looked at essentially what you're describing, a very complex, it's all in silico chemistry, but they looked at a very complex early Earth environment and what kind of chemical reactions, would emerge out of that environment, what kind of or potentially biomolecules. And so that to me is probably, I think, the direction that you're going to see prebiotic chemistry go is, what people sometimes call a Beilstein type of synthesis or a Beilstein approach. which is this compendium of, 10 million organic compounds. And,
Right.
Weierstein reaction is everybody just throwing, you just throw stuff in the pot and let it rip. And of course, that's a very difficult experiment to do in the lab and make any sense out of it. But with in silico chemistry, you actually have the opportunity, I think, to begin to understand how, you might actually have coherent chemical systems emerge out of a very complex environment. And so that work to me is very intriguing. But I actually, based on the results of this alchemy work, it almost seems as if you could make a teleological argument, because it looks as if it may be that prebiotic chemistry is actually emerging out of the fundamental laws of nature, and that the endpoints of the process seem to be in effect dictated by the laws of nature. And so that actually has teleological implications. So
yeah, but does it? Because that's basically how I see it. I see it as carbon. The way carbon ended up in the periodic table, the complexity of carbon basically is what kickstarts all of this. The fact that carbon has these combinatorics, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be teleological, teleonomical. You end up going a certain way, but to me, I see no signature of an intelligence pushing it. It could have been just that this particular alignment of physical factors basically ends up creating that complex match that gets lit, and it takes off from there. So I don't see the necessity of intelligent designer there, but anyway, so evolution. So you apparently buy all of evolution.
I straddle kind of a ID/creationist position and at the position of a theistic evolutionist. So I'm kind of in between. Okay. So I think that there's aspects of the evolutionary paradigm that are well established, that are non-controversial. And I think there's other places where I'm not convinced that mechanisms alone, at least based on what we understand about current evolutionary theory, that mechanisms alone can explain certain transitions in life's history.
Yeah.
So I kind of have a hybrid position where I don't outright reject, all of evolutionary theory, but I don't also find all of it compelling.
Yeah. So, like the eukaryotic step, the step to eukaryotes, where basically there was an ingestion of part of the cell membrane, and it ended up encapsulating the DNA, or the main part of the DNA, not necessarily all of it. You find that implausible? That
yes, I'm skeptical that it's for lack of a better description, maybe the endosymbiont hypothesis or endosymbiogenesis or whatever you might want to call it. Superficially, that the evidence that supports that idea is robust on a superficial level. But as a biochemist, when I start looking at the details of what would have to happen at a biochemical level to support that kind of those kind of events, it really becomes, to me, I think, problematic. There's a lot of, I think, significant chasms in our understanding of how that kind of transition could take place. So to me, it's that when you start rolling up your sleeves and getting into the details, that's where I begin to become skeptical that it's that evolutionary processes alone could somehow account for that. And of course, it's a non-Darwinian model to begin with, right?
Yeah. So let's see. So looking, going from prokaryote to eukaryote, and that basically that invagination that would have to happen of the cell membrane and surrounding the nucleus. There's when you look into the proteins in the cell coat and the proteins that developed like actin and things that allowed prokaryotes to move, to motivate and to somewhat structure their cells, you see the precursors to what is needed in order to turn that envelope inside out and create a internal organelle in the cell. And that's kind of the level that I've been looking at, for the last couple of months, actually, how membranes basically stick to surfaces, stick to other membranes, the possibility of multicellularity. But when you look into that stuff, I'm wondering how your mind and my mind differ, because you already kind of don't want it to happen, right? Or you don't.
I mean, I'm open,
Yeah.
to what the explanation would be. But again, when I start looking at the details, I just see at a biochemical level, some real issues about how something like that could actually, come about.
Yeah, but would you sit down and try to work it out? Try to really work hard to figure out how it happened? I guess is what I'm getting at. Because that's what I do every day, and I'm wondering if you would do the same. As far as being skeptical about this stuff, I think we're the same. We're both skeptical, right? It's like, how in the heck did this happen? It just doesn't. It just seems like like too many things lining up at the same time, right? But then I work harder at it and I start working it out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, no, that could be a pathway. Like for instance, if you do have one prokaryote out there and it happened to encapsulate a chunk of its DNA with a nucleus, okay, and then that cell goes ahead and divides, and you got one cell with a nucleus and you got one cell without a nucleus, right? The one without a nucleus is going to die. The one with a nucleus is going to go on, divide again, create one offspring. So, but you're not going to get anywhere with that one offspring, right? But then if one of these things, if this thing happened a billion times, and one of those cells just happened to have the actin lined up so that it divided, when the cell divided, that the cell also divided the nucleus. And we already had replication of DNA. Of course, we'd have to grant that. And now all of a sudden, you have a cell with two offspring, which is an incredible increase in the number of offspring that you're getting, right? And it goes on and divides to 4 and 8 and 16, and we know how that works. So you end up finding these insurmountable imaginary barriers, right? And then you go and look further and further into it, and you find, oh, there is a way for that to happen.
Yeah.
And what do you guys accuse us of? Too much imagination? Is that a bad thing?
No. Imagination is, perfectly fine. And I think, to me, I really try as much as I can to avoid kind of a God of the gaps reasoning, right? Where you just say, okay, hey, there's no explanation, therefore God did it. To me, that may be an initial indicator that this might be a place where maybe divine intervention is required, but there's got to be other pieces of evidence that substantiate that. So and so right now, when it comes to the origin of life, I think that the approach that I would present formally actually, I think, does avoid the God of the gaps critique. But when it comes to something like the endosymbiont hypothesis, I'm still at the point where I look at this and I say there seems to me to be at this point what I think to be some real significant problems with this model. But I don't know that I would at this point say, well, this is where God intervened, other than I would say this is a place where we don't have, I think, a robust evolutionary explanation. So I would never use the endosymbiont hypothesis to make a case for design, right, or for a creator. I would go probably to abiogenesis, into the nature of biochemical systems, to make that particular argument. So that But to me, I would hope that the approach that I present isn't stultifying to science, or would discourage science, but rather what I would argue is that, in light of some of these challenges, could we broaden the possible, range of explanations to include something that is teleological in nature, that involves agency, because I think there are ways that you could actually probe that question scientifically. That would be my point.
Yeah. Agency is kind of interesting. Agency always happens across time. It reaches out into time. Like if I decide to pick this cup up, I decide to pick it up prior to picking it up. And I also have to have the means of picking it up. So I have to have a mechanism, right? I have to have hands that are, trained to pick the cup up at the same time. So agency requires more than just a plan. Mm-hmm. It requires the mechanism of execution, that sort of thing. But it always happens all the time. But that one. But mitochondria, you got to admit that they look a lot like prokaryotes. That they have a lot in common with prokaryotes. Right?
They absolutely do, and there's no question about that. Right. And again, that would be something that I think would count in support of the endosymbiont hypothesis, right? But for example, I've written a number of blog articles on just some concerns I have with endosymbiogenesis, and so I just pulled one up because I couldn't remember details off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. But what, something that I think is interesting is that in mitochondria, you have, of course, you're generating the ATP in the matrix, and then you have an ATP transporter that is pumping the ATP from the matrix into the cytoplasm, and then of course you have an antiporter that's bringing the ADP back into the cell, or from the cytoplasm into the cell. Well, the problem with that directionality of ATP transport is that in the early stages of endosymbiogenesis, where you have this endosymbiont that would establish a symbiotic relationship inside the host cell, is that the transport of ATP is always going to be from the cytoplasm into the host cell, into the endosymbiont, not the other way around. Okay. And that in nature, because ATP is such a valuable commodity, because it's the energy currency, to actually, for an organism to produce ATP and pump it into the environment would essentially spell its extinction, right? And so it's got to be the other way. And so the big question then becomes, during that process of evolution, where the endosymbiont becomes a mitochondria, how do you essentially reverse that direction of transport, right? How do you? And so this is a question that is essentially currently without any kind of resolution. It's not to say that people haven't proposed models, but those models that are being proposed are really highly speculative and are types of evolutionary just so stories. And I'm not saying that in a critical way. It's just that there's not really any kind of indication as to how that change in direction took place. So that would be an example of the types of problems that you see, and there's numerous problems along these lines with the details of how this transformation took place.
Yeah, the Antiporters are one of the first things I ever heard you say. I think when you first came on my radar, the first time I ever saw you, that sort of thing. But with things like the Golgi apparatus and budding off, the inside becomes the outside when it buds off, right? And I haven't worked out a particular model for that, but that is interesting, that the inside becomes the outside, and that's kind of what you're saying. that there's sort of a switcheroo here.
Yeah.
So
but
that's a possibility to look into. So that's one of those avenues, that you have to say,
sure.
well, okay, it could have happened that way.
Yeah.
The thing about mitochondria that bothered me is the fact that so many of the genes are actually in the nucleus, not in the mitochondria.
Yeah.
That so many have been transferred out. And then I started looking into these what is it? Organelle interactions, and how close they are together, and how there's this exchange of information between the two of them. And there's kind of a new field. I think the research is probably within the last 5 or 10 years about how Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, and all of those actually they're on these actin rods. And what was it was a phone. Okay, I thought it was a bird out in my backyard, because I live in a river valley and we have strange birds. Anyway, sometimes I think I live in the Amazon jungle. I live in Minnesota and I hear the weirdest birds out there. Definitely. This is an aside, but one day I heard a bird imitating an owl, and then it imitated a police siren, and then it imitated a squirrel making a noise. And I thought, what kind of bird does that in Minnesota? I don't know. Anyway, but, okay. So this organelle, this framework, of organelles touching and basically merging and communicating information, suddenly became a pathway that I would look into for that transfer of bat and viruses of DNA from mitochondria to the nucleus. And God knows that's a complicated field in itself. But the thing is, I look into it every day because I am without the luxury of a creator that did it.
Yeah.
Being a
Well,
second,
and to me, if just because one speculates that a creator did it doesn't mean that again shuts down inquiry or
any possibility.
Right. It just the question becomes, well, how did the creator affect this? Why is it this way? What's the rationale for it being that way? I think the set of questions that you might ask are different, but I don't think it necessarily shuts down, or it shouldn't shut down the inquiry. Right. But I'm sympathetic to the point you're making that, hey, is this just going to stultify, scientific advance if we just say God did it, right?
It would, wouldn't it? I mean, if you stop there at any point, it basically would stop us cold, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess that's a place where I would disagree. Is that I think, again, there's a lot of motivation from a Christian worldview perspective to actually pursue science, because if you think that God is revealed through the record of nature, which is a part of Christian theology, then that's strong motivation to study the record of nature and to understand the processes in nature, because it's viewed as gaining insight, if you will, into the mind of God, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it just may be again that the set of questions or the lines of inquiry that are pursued might be different, but it doesn't mean that scientific investigation will shut down.
Maybe that's why God created us atheists.
Right.
It's an idea. So I think switching, there isn't a lot we disagree with, as long as you're open. You're kind of like another person that I really like to talk to is Saigar, and he is very open to any of it because he loses nothing. I mean, if I were to show you, basically, if we were to find proof about how the mitochondria happened, how the eukaryotic cell came from prokaryotes, you and Sai would lose nothing from your faith at all, because you have faith that runs runs on a deeper stream, right? So really hard for me. So I'm disappointed we don't have a lot to fight about.
Well, but I guess in some respects, Yeah, I mean, I guess a good fight is always a lot of fun, but
I don't like to fight, Ashley, but
no,
anyway.
no, me either. But but to me, I think this is really the way it ought to be, right? Is that regardless of one's worldview, there ought to be a curiosity about how the world works, and a joint commitment to try to understand how it works and to pursue, explanations, and recognize that the insight that we develop can be, hopefully translated into insights and understanding that might lead to the treatment of diseases, or
Right.
emergence of new technologies. And so I think there's science should be this environment where people from all different worldview perspectives have a place. And if I have a complaint with modern day science, it's just, I think at times the removal of teleology from the life sciences, which really was what constituted the Darwinian revolution. To me, that I think maybe limits the richness of potential explanations, that and may keep us from truly understanding how things emerge. But there's some interesting ideas that are coming, that are arising, that uh, may actually bridge differing worldview
Right.
perspectives.
Yep.
I'm thinking of the ideas of Simon Conway Morse as an example, the idea of structuralism. That there's that it's not simply a historically contingent evolutionary history that characterizes life, but there is essentially there are these physical constraints that arise out of the nature of the universe that kind of force uh, the evolutionary process to specific
Right.
endpoints. And that's a place where you can, if you choose, you can view evolution in highly teleological terms, or if you choose not to, you don't have to. But it's an intriguing idea that maybe it's not natural selection alone, but it's actually something about the very structure or fabric of the universe that
Right.
that's driving certain endpoints. And that was kind of a point I was getting at earlier with regard to the origin of life, is that I'm beginning to see what I think to be these interesting anthropic coincidences in the very nature of of what people are contemplating as prebiotic chemistry.
There's like, you familiar with Maturana and Varela and the
Uh,
autopoietic cell movement and all of that?
I'm not. I'm not.
Okay, they're connected with structural realism and a few of those things, and then of course we have Dennis Noble, and he's got, there's the extended synthesis people, and it
Right.
seems like we are looking at it in a much different a different way now, where we're not looking at we're looking at dynamical systems that go from top down and bottom up at the same time, and create this sort of closed system that is life. It's got a certain closure to it. Okay. Where it's autopoietic, it's self-building, self-structuring, that sort of thing. And yeah, there is a good reason, that and biosemiotics, I think, is coming up and changing the face of what was the mechanistic idea of Darwinian evolution from the 1950s, that sort of thing. And I'm all into that stuff. I like that stuff because that fits my complex flower worldview, so well, that it makes me feel good, that sort of thing. But, so we got about 15 minutes left. How do you get to a Christian God from here? And maybe we could talk a little bit about faith and God. And
Yeah. Well, a little bit about my story very quickly, if you have any interest.
sure.
But I was an agnostic as an undergraduate student. Uh, when I went into graduate school, I was again an agnostic, and it was really the elegance of the design of biochemical systems and what I saw to be some intractable problems with chemical evolution that convinced me there seems to be, at least when it comes to the origin of life, a creator of some sort that was responsible for bringing life into existence. But to me, the conversion to Christianity came from really beginning to wonder, well, who is this creator? How do I relate to this creator, if at all? And it was presented, with, in effect, the gospel. And this was, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. And so, Christianity was something I had really very little familiarity with. And when I was exposed to the gospel and began to read the Gospel of Matthew, and specifically the Sermon on the Mount, I would say that I had a type of religious experience. And so to me, coming to faith in Christ was not a strictly speaking, a rational process, right, but it was an experiential process. Not that necessarily, I think, denigrates it or anything like that. It was, what I would say is encountering God, if you will, that made me become a Christian. But I think you could, if you like to have fun with natural theology, you could, from features of the universe, begin to reason your way towards what would be the minimum characteristics, of this creator.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you hold the view that at least our local universe has a beginning, then you would say, well, that creator must be outside the universe, must be transcendent, that type of thing. If we see design in the nature of the universe, in the fine tuning of the constants of physics, well, maybe that this creator, this transcendent cause, has a personality. So you could begin to, I think, maybe give some parameters from nature itself as to the character or the potential identity of the creator. And I think that if you go through that exercise, it pushes you towards, kind of a Judeo-Christian view of God. That would be my
Except
argument.
We wouldn't be here having this conversation if things hadn't been that way.
Right.
That's the old mud puddle thing,
Yeah, right.
The mud.
Right.
Yeah, I'm quite taken by that line of reasoning. But did you have a specific, like 1 to 3 day experience where you kind of came to this religious experience? Did you feel like a moving religious experience within a certain period of time?
No, it was actually
gradual.
It was, I was open and interested in, what what the gospel entailed. And, I, was reading the Gospel of Matthew, and what intrigued me was, here's the Christmas story. I didn't grow up again in a Christian home. And so it's like, oh, this is where the Christmas story comes from. It's, a little bit sad, I suppose. But it was really reading the Sermon on the Mount that was the place where I had the religious experience. And, I had the sense that there was a person present with me. I was reading it actually in the chemistry lab where I was doing my graduate work. It was, in the evening, everybody had gone home for the day, and I was just in the lab hanging out, reading, from the Gospel of Matthew. And I had this sense that there was another person with me, in the lab. And that was when I had this overwhelming sense that this is true. And I've never had an experience like that prior to that. I've never had an experience like that afterwards. And so, make of that what you will. That was, the experience that I had. And, I kind of on the side of interest in, it's a little known argument for God's existence called the argument from religious experience. And the person I've heard articulate this is a philosopher named Richard Swinburne. So it's a fascinating approach to arguing for God's existence. But so Swinburne tries to take, the religious experiences that people report, and then uses that as a way to construct a case for God. So interesting. It's an interesting argument.
So I got an interesting story for you. Let's see. I basically abandoned the idea of Christianity when I was about 8 years old. My mother was trying to bring me to church, and then of course I entered a teenage teenage landscape that was horrifying. Bipolar, depression, suicidal, horrible, just horrible angst and not being okay with my own skin, right? And we were reading a lot of Western philosophers, and it just made it worse and worse. And I ran into an Eastern philosopher named Alan Watts, and it was Christmas Eve in 1967, 66, I think. And I was 15 years old, so yeah, 66. About 9:30 at night, my mom and dad are out at the bar, and of course they're going to come home and they're going to wreck the house and scream at each other and upset the cookies that I left out for my little brother and sister for Santa Claus, that sort of thing. And I'm like melting down emotionally in all areas of my life. At 15 years old, I was ready to give it up. And Ellen Watts brought me on a sort of a story. He told a story about if you went to sleep every night. I'm not going to get into the story, but basically you could dream anything that you wanted and it would be real, right? And you did this over and over and over again. And at the end of the story, you pop up and he says, and like the very last stage after he goes through all the things that you would wish for, that you would wish to happen, he says, you go to sleep and you can't think of anything. So you say, surprise me. And you wake up and you are you. And I just like bang right there. The entire world lit up for me. And I had this experience that lasted for 3 days. And it changed my entire life. And it made me what I call a secular Buddhist. But of course, I wasn't reading scripture. I was reading a westernized version of Buddhism, right? Which was secular Buddhism at the time. And it was almost like when the gosling hatches from the egg, whatever he sees first is going to imprint, right? So yes, religious experiences are real, powerful. I think we all have them to some degree all the time. We have these moments, you walk out and you look up and the sun just bursts over the horizon and just, lights the world up. And it's like, holy, it's like, that sort of thing. So that kind of led me onto this life of meditation, spirituality. I even pray, that sort of thing, but I'm an atheist, so I just want to leave you with that possibility that religious experiences don't just happen to Christians. This has been something that's documented in history for a very long time. But the most important thing is not how we rationalize it. It's that we embrace the experience itself and live the experience, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what pathway, what path. I have a really good friend named Luke, who I don't know why he's a Christian, but he finds things in the Bible. He finds layers and layers and layers, of truth in the Bible, and basically that that leads in his faith, that sort of thing. And I appreciate that, but just I don't know, just leave you with that. I'm. Do you have any questions about that? Like I've had Nephilim Free. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a kind of a character that's been around forever.
I don't know him, but
okay. Anyway, he was telling me, oh, no, you didn't have a real experience. I had a real experience because Jesus was there. My experience wasn't real because Jesus wasn't there. So It drives me crazy when people discount your experience, that you had, that is so earth-shattering, a life-changing experience, that I had when I was 15 years old. And I'm 70 now, and that thing is still with me. And it still guides me, and it's still yielding results, that sort of thing.
Well, I it's interesting you say that, because that experience that I had, will keep me probably from ever walking away from my faith as a Christian, because it was such a powerful experience.
Right.
So in some respects, and this is going to sound, to some people, horrible, and other people, they're going to take delight in the fact that I say this, but I don't know that there's anything that honestly could count against my faith as a Christian because of the strength of that experience. And I think that's what I hear you saying about your experience.
Yeah, for me it was suddenly embracing being a child of the universe and being exactly in the life that I would have. And it was that total acceptance and that gratitude and that powerful mix of emotional, but much deeper than emotion experience. That's that sort of thing that stuck with me, and it gave me an everlasting love of complexity in nature and chaos and randomness, which are probably things that you would think are not very good at doing things. But for me, that is the dance of life. That is the dance of the universe and the cosmos. And I just, the faith, when I hear you guys talk about faith and religious experience, I can relate to it. And that's the thing that really drives me nuts. And then I hear there are some talking head atheists that just reject everything but rationality and that sort of thing.
Well, your ideas and your experience reminds me of a woman named Ursula Goodenough, who she's wrote a book a few years ago, and I wish I could remember the name of the book. I never ever can remember the name of her book, but she
How do you spell her name?
Her last name is like it sounds, Good, Good. I think it's Enough, and Ursula's
Good enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but she's a molecular biologist and calls herself a religious non-believer. And so in her book it's like a devotional where she looks at different aspects of nature and then responds, with this religious gives a religious response to it, and so it's just interesting to me that it's a juxtaposition of ideas and responses to nature that I don't think necessarily I would at first glance think even belong together, but so it sounds like you probably would have
Oh my God, thank you.
some common ground with her, but
thank you for that. It sure sounds like that. Sounds exciting.
Well, to me, it's interesting because the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the church at Rome, begins where he talks about, essentially the magnificence of the creation, right? And, he says, his argument is that, well, this evidence for the creation, is or for the creator from the creation is, evident, but yet there are people that choose to worship the creation rather than the creator. And so, to me, I think that, right. But to me, I think where there's common ground is that we all stand in awe. This is what I got from Ursula Goodenough, is that we all stand in awe before the creation, and that there's an enormous amount for us to celebrate within the creation and to marvel together about what we see in the creation. And so then the question really becomes, how do we interpret, how do we ultimately make sense of the creation? And one approach would be the approach that I take, which is that there is a mind behind it all, and that there's, purpose behind it all. And, another approach is, I think the approach that you represent, which is, that the creation is worth celebrating, in and of itself. Right, I guess is how maybe I would articulate it. Probably poorly. Maybe I should let you articulate it. But
that the creation is one and the same as the creator. That there is no dogmatic difference between. Like Buddhism is all about sans dogmatism, right? It's about like a Buddhist can actually pick Christianity as a path, and become a Christian as a pathway, right? It doesn't matter what path. What matters is that. That stream, that core that runs through it, that spiritual stream that runs through it. So I don't know. So anyway, I don't think I'll fight with you in the future. I think I said bad things about you, something about selling out or something like that. But that was just I didn't know you, and that's sort of my standard charge against all of you scientists who work for on that. I apologize for that.
Oh.
I was a bad person. I have my days. I have my moments, my devilish moments when I really, really make a lot of the Christians mad at me. So anyway, but
Well,
anyway, yeah,
I enjoyed
pretty cool.
I enjoyed the conversation. We've got to do it again.
Okay, well, yeah, my guys are going to want us to fight about something, so maybe we can find something. So anyway,
Yeah.
Okay, good. We'll end it here. Is that good?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say in signing off?
No, just thank you for reaching out, and enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. So
Good. Wonderful having you. Okay, I got to find the right banner, and I got to figure out how to get out of this place. I'm not the good. My production values are not us. We're not. Okay. Goodbye, cruel world. Thank you.